Hey guys, today we're going to be in Genesis 21 verses 32 through 34. Now we're going to skip a small section of 35 through 31. It's just really about a well, and Abraham and Abimelech talk about this well and who owns it. And so it's not something we necessarily need to dig into, but I do find some interesting things happening right here in verse 32. It says, after making their covenant at Beersheba, Abimelech left with Phicol, the commander of his army, and they returned home to the land of the Philistines. Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba, and there he worshiped the Lord, the eternal God. And Abraham lived as a foreigner in Philistine country for a long time. All right, so as I dig into this and look at it, when we talk about Abimelech here, he's now made a covenant with Abraham. I think this is a kind of a multi-pronged covenant here. It's dealing with the well that's talked about in the few previous verses, and it's also dealing with the original reason he came to see him, which was the idea of the not being deceived, of Abimelech not having the same problems Abraham he had before, because he understood that Abraham was under God's protection here. So they make this covenant, and then they return home, and then it says Abraham planted this tree, and he worshiped the Lord, the eternal God, and he lived as a foreigner in the Philistine country for a long time. Okay, so he immediately turns to worship God. Abraham, much of his time in the Promised Land was kind of fraught with issues, right? He was living in tents. He had conflict with kings. He kind of had conflict and even had to kind of step away from the king of Sodom, who wanted to give him all these things and he didn't want them. He has to rescue his nephew. He and his nephew have problems. He's traveling up and down the land. He's felt threatened because he's felt like people were going to take his wife from him. There's been a lot of conflict and things happening. You had Hagar and his son Ishmael. And through all of these things with relationships and conflict inside and outside of his family, and those things can really push us away from God. I find that when we a lot of times find ourselves in those kind of conflicts and those kind of problems, we can tend to start to want to lean on ourselves. And we can tend to sometimes even blame God for the things that we feel we have been wronged in. But Abraham really didn't. He struggled. He sinned. He sinned at times. He sinned with Hagar. He sinned in Egypt. He sinned with Abimelech. He dealt with all these things. And a lot of times also we tend to flee from God when we sin. So when there's conflict, we can tend to drift from the Lord. And when there is sin in our lives, we tend to drift from the Lord. But Abraham didn't. Instead, he ran to God. So here he is, living as a foreigner in this country, continuing to stay close to God, no matter the circumstance. Even when he messed up, he repented, he turned back, and he seeks to worship this eternal God. So let that be something that stays in the forefront of your mind. That when sin happens in my life, when conflict happens in my life, don't run from God, run to God. You guys have a blessed day. We'll see you again real soon.